Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and I tear up every time I listen to Fleetwood Mac. Let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back, guys and gals. Today we have a great episode that I'm excited to get into with a landscape photographer, something that a lot of beginners, perhaps yourself, are really interested in, as you can just kind of go out and do it yourself without any requirements from anybody else's help. You don't need to find families. You don't need to be at a wedding. You can just go out on your own free time, do something that you enjoy, and take pictures of nature and landscapes. So today's guest is going to share some great stuff that I cannot wait for you to hear. But first, I got really excited about this, and I have to share this. We got a new review for the podcast from Anthony Olton. And Anthony's actually in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. So here's what he says. He says, I look forward each week to hearing Raymond and his guests talk. His interviews always feel like two friends catching up, yet also offer very impactful advice. I also feel as though the true benefit comes from the Facebook group because he's so accessible and willing to answer questions. Anthony, man, thank you so much for that beautiful 5-star review of the podcast. I really do. I'll give you a little story. For the past year or so, I've been thinking about starting the Facebook group for the podcast and just didn't. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was some sort of fear that nobody would show up, right? Or that it would just turn into sales pitches from sleazy people who just join groups to try to sell things like sunglasses or whatever. And I really didn't want that. I really wanted the Facebook group to be a place where people can come and feel safe about either the photos that they're sharing or the ideas or questions that they have. So I put a lot of work into it, and I'm glad to hear that's how you feel, that is what it is that you are getting out of the group, man. Because I know when I was a beginner, sharing my photos was a scary thing. So having a place where it's safe to share those photos and not have to worry about criticism of dumb things. We're all at a different point in our photography journey, and just because what, the exposure triangle is or how aperture affects your photos doesn't mean that everybody else does, So thank you so much, Anthony, for, again, that awesome 5-star review. And if you want to join the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, feel free to do so. We would love to have you. If you're listening to this right now, just head over to facebook.com/Beginner Photography Podcast, and you will see the linked group right there towards the top of the page, I believe. And also, if you're getting any sort of value out of this podcast, man, would I truly appreciate if you left a review for the podcast. I would be more than happy to share it here on the podcast and give you a quick shout out just as a thank you from me to you. It really does help us get more guests on the show. It gives us validity, and more guests means more information for you. So I'm really hoping that you could take just 2 minutes out of your day and leave the podcast a review. So that's it. Guys, we are going to go ahead and get into today's interview with Michael Bollino. And he is a landscape photographer out of the Pacific Northwest, the very beautiful Pacific Northwest. In fact, shooting a wedding in Oregon or Washington is on my bucket list for sure, with all those mountains and the beauty. You know what? My grandparents lived in Oregon, and growing up I would go up there every year, and I never, as you're a kid, hindsight's always 20/20, you never realize the beauty that's right in front of you, and now of course I'm dying to get back there just to shoot a wedding. And it's great because listening to this interview, Michael does understand the beauty that is around him every single day, and he takes that and applies it towards his photography to capture it. He mentions in the interview that he never has any signs of life in any of his photographs. No people, no nothing, just sheer beauty of nature. So without any further ado, we're going to get into it right now with Michael Bollino. Today's guest is Michael Bollino, a landscape photographer who has been shooting for over 20 years. His photography has taken him all around the world, where he has produced some absolutely jaw-dropping images that can really make you appreciate this planet that we live on. So today, Michael, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Raymond.
Absolutely. You know, I mentioned that you've been shooting for quite a long time and that you produce some images that I personally would love to own.
Nice.
But why don't we take a step back, and why don't you tell me how you got into photography?
Sure. Well, I kind of started dabbling in college. And so in college, I kind of discovered going to nature, going to the backpacking, doing some climbing with some friends in college. And of course, you bring along a little point and shoot and load some film into it. And you get back home from those trips and you go to the film kiosk and you put it in and you get the prints back in an hour. And so that was kind of the very first entry. And then that was back in Maryland, and we would go to like New Hampshire and Maine, and then out west in the summer times a few years. But it really wasn't until I moved to Oregon in 1997 that I started really wanting to kind of figure things out more. And it really wasn't until 2000 when I got an SLR, a film camera, that I actually wanted to start reading more about photography and learning more about the photography. And the whole reason for that is really because I wanted to go into nature and photograph it. And I started seeing images from Galen Rao and Art Wolf and some of those guys, and was just blown away that, you know, you can go into these amazing places which are so beautiful. And with some knowledge and some understanding of how you can work a camera, you can actually bring back some images which are not just merely recording your experience. And so really, photography is an offshoot of just exploring nature and backpacking and some climbing and things like that. So that's how I got into it.
Wow. So can you walk me through a little bit more of the process of going from just point and shoots to kind of where you are today? You mentioned obviously learning, I'm assuming from books, because back before 97, there wasn't much Google around or any Google around. Yeah. So was that your main education source, was books?
Definitely. Galen Rao, Mountain Light, I think is the name of the book. It's the book, I always get confused. It's the one book where I don't own it currently, unfortunately, to get it, where he has an image, and on the other side, it's like a several paragraph walkthrough of his whole mental processes in the field, why he chose the technical choices, and why he arranged things the way he did to create the image that he shows on the other page. And I remember distinctly being like, oh, you can use a foreground element. That's great. Because he had like pictures of like a creek or maybe flowers or whatever it may be.
Right.
And in 98, I think I did a backpack to the Enchantments, which is in Washington State, an amazing area, granite peaks, lots of lakes, lots of little creeks you can explore. And for my camp, I was like, oh, there's an amazing peak and there's a creek. Let's try using this as a foreground element. And that was like, and I got it back. Of course, it's a junky picture, probably out of focus, but I took it with a point and shoot. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's actually kind of close, but not nearly as cool or as awesome as Galen's photo. So that was kind of like that, maybe the very first time where I said, instead of just taking shots, let's look at the elements, the compositional elements in front of me, and let's use this creek and this mountain behind it to kind of maybe make a true image. So that's where that started. And then when I bought the SLR was because I decided to go to Nepal. And I decided to trek in Nepal for 3 months. And I said, okay, this is a big trip. I'm going to get an SLR.
Going to want to document it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that point, I read Galen's book and picked up a couple tips, and I called them mantras at the time, like expose your most important highlight, which I took a couple different ways. But I got the camera, and I think a 28 to 300 millimeter all-in-one zoom lens, and I went to Nepal for 3 months and ran a lot of film through it. I didn't take any slides, which I'm not sure why I decided to do that, but I took a lot of film pictures. And, you know, you're in Nepal, it's just so incredibly beautiful. And when I got back, I just feel like those images were just so much better than anything I ever were able to capture with just a point and shoot. And so that was like when the desire to truly explore photography really came about. It was probably post Nepal. So that would be, I guess, the beginning of 2001. And so I just took that SLR with me on backpacking trips and started shooting a lot of slides and just try to make some images. And it was still mostly just what I kind of call like documenting that trip. But there would be times where I'm like, ooh, the light's really nice right now. Let's go out and try to find something to work with. And those attempts back there are pretty feeble, but once in a while I get something I really like. Um, and then the next jump was probably my wife and I, we got married in 2003 and we went traveling for a year and a half. And so
Wow.
yeah, it was great. Back to Nepal, back to India, back to the Himalayas, and then South America for a year, going to Patagonia, up through Argentina to Bolivia and Peru, and doing a lot of trekking, a little bit of climbing. And I shot all slides through that. And back then, like to me, back then, the coolest shots you can get, it didn't even matter about the sky and the clouds. It was like direct morning or sunset light lighting up a peak.
Right, right.
So just like that direct, super low angle sun where the peak just goes red or orange. And I thought that was so cool. And so I got that in the Himalayas a couple times, and I got that in Patagonia, and I thought those shots were just amazing, you know. And of course, I think differently about light nowadays. But I remember getting those slides back and being like, this is just incredible. This is phenomenal. And being pretty happy with that at that point of that stage.
I think that early morning light or late night light, I'm not sure what it is, but
yeah,
I believe it's the main desktop wallpaper for Mac OS X, not Mavericks, maybe El Capitan.
El Capitan.
I'm not sure,
yeah.
but whatever it is, it's just like you mentioned, that nice, beautiful red light. It's just like illuminating El Capitan. Not so much Half Dome, I don't think, but then
Yeah.
everything else below it is nice and still dark
Nice and
and
shadow.
quiet. Oh,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. So you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
Yeah, you can get these super razor-like lines where something's blocking the light ray and just kind of lights up. There's a couple images on my website from Nepal and Patagonia where you can kind of check those out as well. I was going to say, but also I carried my first little, on that trip in 2003 and 2004, my first little point and shoot digital camera. And so just having that constant feedback loop, and even with the 3.2 millimeter sensor, that kind of really just having that at my disposal and taking a picture and seeing it and taking it again and recomposing and you know, that also I think nudged me more towards really exploring photography, even though that was more of just a daily photography I do as we were traveling.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what
yeah.
were you using the point and shoot as like a way to just compose shots on your SLR, or was it a way to check and confirm like your settings?
Well, I think it's mainly just as like we were hiking or just where we were, like in the city, we'd be going around and walking around, just taking pictures of interesting things. But for the SLR nature, like even if we were like in a city while we're traveling, I wasn't going to carry that around and take pictures with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved having that little teeny pocket size point and zoom to do that. And so that was, I just really appreciated having that. And there's just that, again, that feedback loop. I can see it. I was like, oh, that's actually a change here. The light's really strong, and let's kind of move it here. And it kind of got to the idea of being able to play with an image or a composition in real time instead of hoping and praying when you're using film that you got your metering correct, that you got your composition correct, that your highlights aren't blown out or your shadows aren't totally clipped and things like that. So
of course.
Yeah. So I think it kind of whet my appetite more. And so, yeah. And so that was great. And so came back, did a lot of backpacking climbing Northwest in 2005. Then in 2007 went to Tibet, and that's when I got my first digital SLR. So that's where I kind of went to, okay, now let's get a more advanced sensor and a couple of lenses. And
before we go any further, I want you to get in the mindset of why. Can you tell me why you switched from film to digital at that point? Because there's, I think still to this day, a lot of like landscape photographers who still shoot slide film, traditional film, because they like, I guess what it gives them. I'm not too sure about lots of the landscape photography terms, but
yeah.
it's kind of like I would say that I think, at least from my perspective, landscape photography has the most amount of film shooters, aside from like, hipster kids or whatever who like aren't really taking it seriously.
Or something.
So when you decided to switch from film to digital, why was that? And like, how much research went into making such a big leap?
Yeah. I think the reason why was a couple of reasons. One, the costs. I mean, every time you buy a roll of film, that's cost. Every time you press that shutter, that's a cost. You have to put it in to get it developed, that's a cost. So there's definitely a financial part of that as well. But I think the major reason was that idea of seeing what I took in real time, being able to adjust settings or adjust composition and play around more. And that was really appealing to me. Shooting film was very methodical because of the cost, and being a young married person, not a lot of money.
Cost was a big factor.
Slides like $8 a roll and you get 24 shots, and then the processing's an added on cost after the trip. Every press of the shutter was really thought out, which in some ways is great because you're truly thinking about, do I want to take this picture or I just want to enjoy what I'm looking at? So I'd meter a lot more. I'd really try to compose more and just be more methodical, which I think is good still. It's something I think is maybe some advice is to be more methodical with your selection of what you're shooting and how you shoot it than just the whole idea of spraying and praying that you get something good. But I think that feedback loop of like, hey, let's do this. Let's drop the exposure a little bit. Ooh, this is too bright or this is too dark, or if I just kind of get down just a little lower, this is going to make this angle feel more dynamic. That was probably the major reason to switch to the DSLR. In 2006, I think that's when digital became, the DSLR started coming around. I got the Nikon D50.
Okay.
Which I believe was like 6 or 7 megapixels. I can't remember. And so it wasn't like a huge sensor in terms of image quality, but I was just kind of time. I was ready.
That makes sense. So at the time, were you shooting JPEG? Were you shooting RAW? Like, was there, I wasn't in it at the time. Was there any sort of workflow for RAW photos?
So great question. So I bought it before Tibet. So one summer I just got done with got my teaching license, and we had like a 2-month window, and my wife and I decided to go travel to Tibet because it's a place I've always wanted to go. I went to the Himalayas in Nepal twice. I was like, I want to see the other side. I want to kind of go to a mountain called Mount Kailash, which is in far western Tibet. And it's a very sacred mountain to many, actually probably couple billion people on our planet. And see Lhasa and everything else. So I bought that camera, the DSLR, for that trip. 90% of the shots I took were JPEG.
Right.
And only on 3 days or so did I switch to RAW. For what I thought would be the better quote unquote pictures. And I totally regret that. Yeah, I should have shot RAW the whole time.
Oh, okay. I see. I thought you were going to say that you regretted shooting RAW for those last few photos.
No, even today there's a couple images where I'm like, if I just shot RAW, I can actually make this into something, or I feel like possibly I could make this image work.
Right.
To a better degree or a higher degree.
It's crazy looking back at it, huh? You think at the time like, oh, well, I just shoot it right in camera. Like, that's my job, to shoot right in camera. So why would I want to shoot RAW? And then years down the road, you still try to do that. You still try to shoot right in camera, but yet those RAWs are so valuable. It's crazy to think about.
And I didn't really even know what a RAW, like I knew what it was. I knew that it had more data and more flexibility, and you can kind of like work with it more after the fact. But I wasn't really entirely clear about all the advantages with RAW. I thought it was just a little bit different than JPEG. I didn't think it was a big deal. JPEG was also a smaller file size. So I have a couple of memory cards. You have to kind of burn them down to CDs. When you're back in Lhasa, we're traveling in very remote areas. I was worried about images, like the actual how many I could shoot as well. So JPEG was a smaller file size. I was like, I can shoot several hundred more JPEGs than if I just shot RAW the whole time.
Yeah, I'm sure it was like a 2 gig card or something like that.
No, I think it was even less. I think maybe like 4. Yeah, no, actually not less. It's more. I think maybe 2 at the most. You're
That's
right.
hilarious.
Like,
yeah.
So small. It's so small. So, and that's, and so after that, I started like taking those images after Tibet and just kind of trying to figure out, hey, I can increase exposure, I can adjust the contrast, you can actually do something in color balance. And that was mostly in like, I think iPhoto's little,
Oh yeah.
slides up. But yeah, that's how that kind of came about.
Well, so after you got back from your trip, on a scale from 1 to 10, how happy were you with your switch and your investment into digital?
Pretty close to a 10.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it was, yeah.
today, do you still shoot any film at all?
No, actually, I
did
don't.
you?
It's so funny because behind me is my old film camera.
Oh,
And
right
just,
on.
hey, this is the N80, and just so that I've noticed that there's actually a roll of film inside here that probably has not been. It's probably from 2007 early on, like
No way.
now, like June of 2007. So I'm not sure if I can try. I'm not sure if it's any good, but one day I'll probably try to get that out there and see what kind of photos are on there. It's black and white, so I'm not sure what it's going to be, but in
You
terms
gotta
of
get that
happiness,
developed.
yeah, I should at some point. In terms of like happiness with switching, I really, it was great.
Mhm.
I really do. There are some things I do appreciate, like the meditative pace of like film, where you're just really using spot metering or center weighted metering a lot more instead of the matrix metering, which is the whole thing, because you really have to really understand exposure. And again, for costs with shooting film, I didn't do much bracketing because that was money. And so for really important photos, I would bracket a little bit, but in general, I didn't. So I have a lot of images which are either underexposed or overexposed because I didn't nail the metering of the scene. But anyway.
So what do you think? You loved the process of shooting film as it made you slow down and really think about the image that you were about to capture. And you say that still translates in your life today?
To some degree, it's something I'm aware of.
Okay.
So,
what would you say to like beginners who probably aren't shooting film? Do you have any ideas of how to get them maybe into that same mindset of how they could achieve something similar? Slowing down.
Yeah. I think so. I still approach it a little bit the same way nowadays. So maybe I can talk about how I approach whenever I'm out.
Yeah, of course.
And it's a little bit more slower than just kind of having my camera out all the time. So even today, so this weekend coming up, if I want to go out and shoot some winter scene, I'm not going to walk around with my camera out. So I'm going to walk around and kind of get a sense of lighting conditions and like the elements that are around me, and just kind of like think about those things that there's going to be a picture around. I don't want to get too down that road, but just kind of feeling and sensing if there's an image around. So the camera stays in my bag for a long while, unless I know for sure there's something going on. I want to get the camera out and start like really honing in a composition.
Yeah.
So I think one advice is not to just walk around aimlessly with your camera. So if I'm done a composition, I put the camera back into my bag and I'm starting to walk down to wherever I'm going to go, and I take the camera back out. I try not to keep my camera on my tripod all the time, because then I'll just stop anywhere and everywhere and just try to shoot. I think when it's just you without carrying a tripod, the big camera on top, or it's in your bag, you're less likely to kind of just shoot whatever little teeny interesting thing you find. And that kind of helps me deliberate more on what's important to shoot on that particular day or in that environment.
Yeah.
Or remember some maybe goals I have, like, hey, if I spend too much time right here, I'm not going to get to where I need to go, because a lot of landscape photography can be you walking a distance to get there.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Of course. That's actually a really good tip. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have thought of something like that. Sometimes I like to just go out to my local state park and just take some photos, but the entire time I'm walking around with my camera in my hand, and like you said, I'm not sure if it's I'm trying to force a photo that isn't there. Like, maybe that's it. If I'm just holding the camera in my hand, like, why? Like, I feel like I'm not doing something if I'm just walking around with it in my hand and not shooting. But that's a really good tip. I like that. So put the camera in the bag. Wait till you find something good.
Yeah, pull it out. Yeah. And also, nowadays we have our phones too. So like you were mentioning before, do I ever kind of take the phone out? I do that as well sometimes. Obviously, the perspective of maybe a super wide angle lens is different than what your phone delivers, but you can kind of get a sense of what's there with your phone, which is a nice thing. Um, Having said that, though, I think as a beginner, if people are getting into photography, experimentation is key.
Right.
Um, I think we get locked into images we may see online and be like, okay, I'm gonna go to the Columbia River Gorge, which I apparently it just burns, so a lot of it's kind of up in the air in terms of what's accessible, or go to Mount Hood or go to the desert Southwest, and I want to get this image, and you're kind of locked and loaded in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to also give advice of like experimenting. So don't go there and look at the scene in front of you and say, oh, this is the image I saw online on Instagram or Facebook or wherever site you're on, and just capture that, because there's often so much more around it that you can capture. And I think as you're developing as a photographer, experimenting is really key. And I think you'll be more satisfied. Like I know for myself, I'm way more satisfied with an image if I didn't predict it beforehand.
Really?
Oh yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. You know, one of the questions that I wanted to ask is what percentage of the photos you take are planned out versus stumbled upon, I guess, if that's the right word. So you would say that most of your images, why don't you walk me through the process? Are you
Sure.
already out just knowing that you're going to be taking photos and then you find something that you want to take a photo of? Or do you don't visualize the photo in your head and then you go and try to capture it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the day and depends on the location. There's usually a goal in mind. So if you're in the Northwest, like it could be a mountain or it could be a creek. I don't do much shooting on the coast. So you're saying, hey, we're going to walk this creek or we're going to go to this waterfall. But the waterfall itself is not the goal, because I know there's a creek there as well. So I want to explore the creek and those options. And those are the found photos. And water levels can rise and lower, which creates different opportunities given on different days and even different seasons. So there's always something out there that's different.
Right.
Waterfall will be kind of most of the same, right? Or in the Southwest, if we go to a location, like I know I'm pretty well aware what there are the common compositions on a location, and so I'll kind of look for those, but I don't really tend to want to shoot those, to be completely honest with you. If I see an image of an area and it's the same composition over and over and over and over and over again, it loses its luster really quickly for me in terms of how I value photography and my own photography. So I'm looking for other alternative compositions and other different little twists in those areas. Having said that, though, I think there is value in, as learners of photographer in the beginning stages, going to a location which may be iconic or well shot, or a location you see on Instagram or Facebook, and you're like, I gotta visit that place. I gotta look at that exact image with my own eyes. There's value in then looking at how that photographer arranged those elements and thinking through why they arranged them the way they did and how that made a photograph more impactful on the viewer.
Right.
But that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
no, that does make sense. You're absolutely right. I feel the exact same way, even though it's an entirely different form of photography for weddings. Like oftentimes if I'm shooting at a venue that I've never been to before, I'll Google it and try to look for photos, mainly just to see what it looks like on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the times I'll see like, oh, everybody's taking the same photo in front of the arch or whatever.
Yeah.
And in my head, I tell myself, now I know what photo I'm not going to take.
Exactly.
Because I'm going to try to take something that's unique, not only for me, but for the couple, because I don't want the couple to have the same profile picture that, 20 other brides in Indianapolis have.
Sure.
You're right. That 100% makes sense.
It's exactly the same. Like I think we're completely on the same page with this. Part of researching a trip is learning what not to take for me. And I think a lot of photographers that I'm friends with, I feel the same way. Like, it's almost like you research a trip and you look at a lot of images coming out of those area or that particular area, and you get more of like a sense of what's a possibility there. Yes. Instead of just saying, oh, that shot, I'm going to go line that exact shot up and I'm going to nail it with great light.
Right, exactly. So when you're looking for photos, how do you define the line between inspiration and copying, I guess?
Yeah.
Or I guess where do you look for inspiration?
Well, I think, just other photographers, like there are so many amazing landscape photographers out there. I'm lucky to kind of know more than a few of those guys or and girls. Some amazing female photographers out there. And I think they're getting more and more female photographers who are really pushing the boundaries of the field as well, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So other photographers are inspiring, and I think you can kind of see their approach, and it kind of like directs your own photography. And I don't ever want to try to copy someone else's approach. I want to try to find my own way of going about creating an image and the images I shoot. So I think I'm inspired by other photographers, but in the field, like again, so in the field, the camera's in your backpack, you're walking through, you're just kind of getting a sense of what the light's doing, about where the different elements you're shooting are, especially if you're looking at a grand landscape, which is a large area that is going to be photographed. And just getting a sense and a feel of the quality of light, the direction of the light, what may light up, what may turn, where some good contrasts may be. And it's just this almost like intuitive feel of what's out there. And then as you shoot, once you get your settings, my favorite time to shoot or favorite parts of shooting is when I don't need to constantly start changing my settings. So either my focus or my aperture or my shutter speed, just things are dialed in, and you're just kind of like working back and forth with what's before you. And something's feeling pretty good. Let's do this. It's a little bit better. And it's almost like wordless. It's like this, almost like a flow state where you're just kind of really just making some minute camera position adjustments, or you just kind of feel that maybe if I just even step a couple steps to the left, it's gonna be a little better. And it's one of those times where like time kind of condenses. And so half hour can go by and it feels like just 2 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's really amazing. I think that's when that's when I feel like a really strong image can be produced the best. So I think as you gain experience of photography, you kind of start to get this intuition that develops about like, hey, this is how the light is. And I see these elements in front of me. If I can maybe wait a little bit longer, the light's going to get a little bit nicer here. And you can use that change in how the light strikes objects or elements in front of you to your advantage.
Of course.
I'm not sure if that's making complete sense to you, but
no, I'm following along completely. Yeah, I think it's important. Let me make sure that I got kind of let me make sure that what I got out of that is kind of what you're saying, is that kind of the more experience that you have, the less you need to look for inspiration in other places because you've already developed a sense of self. Is that right?
I think you got that pretty well. I think inspiration just happens spontaneously too.
Yeah.
So there'll be times where I'm like out and I'm shooting and I'm not really feeling it, and then all of a sudden something happens. I'm like, oh, this is great. Other times where I'm in front of an amazing area and the light is really good and I'm just not feeling it. Mm-hmm. So it has to kind of come from inside as well. So sometimes it doesn't happen even though you feel like it should. And to me, the more you think and think and think and think, there's got to be a photo, the less like it's there to happen. The more you kind of enter this whole idea of like just feeling what's going on in front of you and reacting to that feeling. And then you have that feedback loop again from the back of your camera.
So you're shooting through that feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, yeah. And that's the beauty of photography. Like,
I didn't know if this was the stage where you were still like trying to figure out where to take a photo before the camera came out. So this is where you're already like.
This is when you're shooting.
Okay, I gotcha.
This is when you're shooting. It's just this kind of like this state where you're kind of trying different things and moving the camera around a little bit and trying. For me, if I overthink things, the way I work, if I overthink it, I think it's going to bottle me up more.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to let it happen naturally and not worry about, oh, the light's going to fade. I'm going to lose it. If I don't worry about that and just work with what I got and keep going through those motions and that process, that works out better for me than worrying about the light going away or overthinking composition or talking to myself about things too much.
Of course.
If that makes sense. I want to just kind of like move through that whole time period when I'm photographing naturally and just kind of let it flow. Again, sometimes we have to adjust your settings a lot, and sometimes landscape photography can be really technical, like if you do some focus stacking, which I'm trying not to do as much anymore. That really bogs you down, in terms of like thinking about what you need to do and making sure things are sharp and your depth of field is deep enough to get everything sharp. So yeah, there's that. So
That makes sense. And you kind of mentioned there, you kind of like to let things unfold naturally in front of you. And on your website, you mention a lot that you're trying to capture the natural world around you.
yeah,
Can
yeah,
you define a little bit about what that means to you and how you incorporate that in your photos?
yeah. So there is almost zero man-made objects or even uh, evidence of humankind in my photos. I think I have one photo of a couple of friends and I climbing a mountain here in the Northwest, and that's it. So the natural world, like going back to college, has been always been a really important part of my life. It's actually a pivotal part of my life. Discovering the natural world was a very life-changing experience for the better. It's the reason I live in Oregon now. It's the reason why I've done some traveling. It's the reason why I'm a teacher as a full-time job. A lot of it kind of goes back to that, discovering the natural world. So to me, getting into backpacking and travel and climbing was a very transformational experience. Occurred over a series of years, of course, but super important part of my life for me. And so, which again is why I'm a landscape photographer and not shooting weddings or sports or street photography. This is just what's such a valuable part of my life is my relationship with nature. So that's why I choose to shoot the natural world. And so I think that answers your question, right? The natural world.
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to figure out a little bit more of how you incorporate more, I guess, organic elements into your photos. What is it that you're looking for when you first show up?
Oh, okay. Yeah. It depends on what type of landscape you're shooting or nature you're shooting. Is it forest? Is it mountains? Is it desert?
Let's play it out. It's let's say that it's a forest.
Okay. So forests, the big whale for me in forests are trees.
Mm-hmm.
A scene with only trees. That is like my Moby Dick of shots. And I've been talking about this for several years online with people. And it is, to me, the most challenging thing to do is to shoot only a tree scene.
Really?
But when you have water and you have creeks, or if you have color in the leaves, it makes it visually more, it simplifies the visual, the composition. So with creeks, you can definitely use creeks as a leading line, which leads maybe back to a waterfall coming down. Mm-hmm. Creeks have a lot of texture, so you can play around different shutter speeds to see what the most appealing texture can be in the water. And another really good tip for people who are just maybe shooting and they do shoot creeks and waterfalls is don't just take one frame of the creek and call it good. Take multiple because each frame will be different because the water, of course, is in different positions as you shoot it. And play around with your shutter speed as well, because that can create either a more glossy water flow or it can create more of a kind of gritty, not grainy.
Right, like
more texture.
There you go, texture.
Yeah. So play around with that. So looking for leading lines is important, especially for wider angle photography. But again, trees are really challenging for me. And I think a lot of landscape photographers would say the same thing.
Is it just because of their size? Like you're trying to get the whole thing in one? Or
I think it's just going from a three-dimensional world to a two-dimensional, screenshot or even print. I think things flatten out. So what looks really amazing to you there, because of that flattening effect,
just blends into the background.
Blends in. Mm-hmm. And so being able to simplify the scene, then what happens is the background stuff, all that color in the background comes forward and flattens. And then what seems to be this amazing tree jumping at you in the foreground is now just kind of like part of the background.
Right, right.
So you need to kind of have a variation in either, like mist can help simplify. So you have a variation in like how much the tree stands out compared to the background and vice versa. So.
Have you seen that photo? I don't know who shot it. I just remember, like, as we're talking here, I remember seeing it from years ago. I think it was a stitch of, like, over 1,000 photos of, I think it was one redwood.
Yes.
And it was, like, it really showed the scale of how big this thing was, but it was able to be captured in, well, more than just one photo, but it was stitched together in just one photo, and it was the first time that the entire redwood had ever been captured.
I've seen that
one. I would love to find that. I'll have to find it in the show notes. I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head, like who was the photographer. I'm sure I could find it on a simple Google search. But it was just truly incredible and just shows how much work goes into photographing simply trees, something that people, I think, take for granted. They're kind of everywhere. You just walk past them. There's a holiday that nobody really, really pays attention to, Arbor Day or whatever. But I'm gonna remember that now. Next time I go out into the forest or the woods, try to capture a tree.
And so I think the image you're talking about is from a National Geographic magazine, and they had like a pull-out, which is either three. I think it's three.
Oh yeah.
And so it's huge. We actually laminated it. It's in my basement somewhere. I need to find it.
Oh, seriously? Oh, that's so cool.
The perspective is like looking directly at the tree.
Yeah.
So you're not looking up or looking down like the way they did it. So it looks like you're just looking at the tree for the entire, 300-foot height of the tree. It's a pretty impressive photo, yeah.
And you don't even realize that it's a big tree until you look at the bottom and realize that ant is a person.
It's a person.
It's crazy. Or maybe even another huge tree. So
yeah.
Do you have one piece of information that you wish that you could go back in time and tell yourself when you first got started in shooting landscapes?
The one piece of information would be I think the whole idea of experimenting more and wanting to go after not just the ones you see and not just the locations you see, but trust that there's photographs all around you and experiment more, and not just shoot the ones you see online. That's important. That's really important because in the film days, that's kind of was my mindset, was only shooting the ones I know about. Right. And so I was definitely less willing to take chances. And so taking chances is really good. You're going to strike out more often than you come home with a good picture. But if you can take that chance, when it does occur, it's pretty magical, pretty awesome.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Oftentimes, I will go out and if I'm shooting something, I'll just kind of, I know that this is the classic photo, but I'm going to take it now just so that I can put my brain in a place so that I can eventually get to a spot where I'm creating something more creative. But yeah, I think if I was shooting on film, that would be a whole lot tougher when I had to think about X amount of dollars every time I hit the shutter.
Yeah, and I think another piece of advice is get that amazing shot that you've probably seen, but then kind of think about what else that scene offers. Yes, take that amazing image of the waterfall or the mountain or the meadows or wherever it may be, get on your belt, and then kind of just think about what else is there. Because it's those what else is there images, which are the ones that for me, appreciate the most. And even when I'm viewing photography online, especially if it's a location I've been to several times, how did that person see that? It's because they were experimenting, they were taking chances, they were the ones who were thinking outside the box, and they got the photo and I didn't. So just keep looking. I'll hike through the forest a couple miles to a waterfall. I'm always just sensing and always looking, all the time. I'm not just thinking about my family or my job. I'm always just kind of thinking about there could be something right around the bend. Just keep looking, keep understanding how the light is changing or whatnot. So yeah.
That's some pretty solid advice that I think is kind of underrated, I guess. It just seems like something that people should know, but once it's told to you, to your face, it becomes more real. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
I really want to be mindful of your time. We've gone on farther than I told you that we would be going on for. So can you share where the listener can find you online and follow along?
Sure. The main place is my website, of course, which is www.michaelbollino.com. So Bollino spelled BOLLINO.com. And then I'm also on Instagram, and I guess it's at Michael Bollino, and then Facebook, Michael Bollino Photography. And those are the main places to find me. I'm a fairly active guy. I'm not super active on social media, but those where you can find my new work. I usually upload my new work to my website before I actually post it online. So if you are curious, you can always go to my new releases gallery, and there's usually some images which are not on either social media platform there. So
personally, what is your favorite social media platform?
Oh man, that's a big can of worms. It's a dinosaur, but I think Facebook, in terms of just general discussion, is still the meatiest place to go. I can still find great images, but I think there's a discussion because of having a back and forth, and because of just reading about other photographers thinking, that is a really solid place to be active in the photographic community. Instagram's a second, but the discussion's really not there for the most part. And Instagram is so just the attention span's so short on
pretty
Instagram.
passive.
Yeah, they're pretty passive, and it's so I prefer Facebook. And I joined Facebook late. I think I joined in 2013. So it wasn't like I've just always been on Facebook and trying to build an audience. And so for years I was like, Facebook, I don't need Facebook. But eventually I did, and it's good. So
Yeah.
yeah. What about you? What do you?
Me, to tell you the truth, personally, it was Snapchat. For a long time, it was Snapchat. I went to school for cinematography. I love telling stories through video. So being on Snapchat and telling stories through video was so much fun for me. And then it's a long story. I switched to Android. Snapchat on Android was garbage. So then right at about the same time, Instagram stories came out. I really enjoy it, but it's not the same experience. So, but I would say overall right now, the Beginner Photography Podcast has a Facebook group. It's a private group that is full of curiosity, and it is so much fun to see. Like you said, you can really get into discussions with people, and they have like real questions. It's a safe place. People don't, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you don't know anything like that. It's real people trying to help each other, and I've been in a lot of Facebook groups before, and it's genuinely one of the most helpful. It's probably the third most helpful that I've been in. Definitely the most helpful free group that I've ever been in my life. So slowly Facebook's starting to become for the exact same reason as you too, which is, but like you said, it's getting old and it's got to make some changes, Facebook soon. So hopefully it does, but I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I know that I spend way too much time on it. I really shouldn't. I should really be more mindful of my time. But Michael, I am going to be mindful of your time. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did. I know that there was a lot of great information that the listeners are going to be able to take home. And I wish you the best, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks for me. I appreciate it, man. Perfect. Seriously, it's always fun to kind of share whatever piece of advice I have. So it's kind of humbling as well. It's kind of like, why me? But I really appreciate you invited me on the show as well. So
what did I tell you? Jeez, I feel like I say that every time at the end of every interview. What did I tell you? But I feel like what else can I say? I mean, these guests come on and they truly share so much information that can help you in your photography. His tips on just slowing down. I mean, something as simple as just putting your camera in your backpack to take better photos. I never would have thought about that, but it's so true. It is so true. When I walk around with a camera in my hand, I feel like I have to take photos. Like I'm being forced to take photos. Like I have to find something good. I have to do this right now. And oftentimes I miss the better picture because I wasn't looking around with my eyes. I was looking around with my camera trying to force something that's not there. So, man, I would love to hear your takeaway in this episode. In fact, I've added Michael Bollino to the group. So he is there. If you are in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, you can feel free to reach out to him right there. Ask him questions, and I'm sure that he would love to help out. So that's it. All right, guys, man, this was a jam-packed interview that I truly enjoyed to the fullest. So, but we are gonna have another one next week that I'm equally excited for. So I'm keeping this excitement up. This is so much fun, guys. Until next week, get out there. Keep shooting. Shoot away. I know that it's cold, but, put on some thermals or something. Get out there, get something interesting. Maybe put your camera away for a little bit until you see that something interesting with your eyes, and then take the photo. All right? But above all, stay safe and have fun. All right. I'll talk to you guys next week. Later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.